there are more valuable forms of capital than financial.
Mm.
Uh, One of the most finite resources in the world is time.
Mm.
Unlike money, time is unidirectional and you can't make more of it. And we only get a finite amount of it ever, right? It's like someone saying, when you're born, you get $1 million for the next 20 years, and that's it, right? Like, um, time is one of these most finite resources. And so we should protect and value time more than we protect and value financial capital.
This is the Job Stories Podcast, how people find work that matters.
I appreciate you coming on the Job Stories Podcast. If we can, just to get us the ball rolling here, do you mind to just introduce yourself and what is your job now? What are you doing currently?
Yeah, so my name is Derek Brown. I'm the founder CEO of a startup in the Web3 crypto space called Bunches, and started that company about a year and a half, maybe 2 years ago, in the middle of the pandemic. Perfect place to start a company, and I've been doing that since.
Cool. What birthed that? What have you? I know you a little bit by now, so I'm basically doing it for the sake of the podcast. But what birthed the entrepreneurial venture that you're on now?
Yeah, I mean, it really started as a creator-focused company. I mean, I was in New York City at the time. A lot of creator friends, both on the kind of traditional social media influencer side, but also musicians and artists. I mean, I used to run a music venue in the South, and I've always been close to that world, right? And over saw that people wanted to escape walled gardens of Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, TikTok. They don't own their own community. They don't own their own monetization. They don't own their job security, right? At any given time, a platform could just kick them off of that platform. And so, we really set out to solve that problem initially on fiat rails. And then, as a crypto hobbyist myself since, probably 2014, we knew that that's the right infrastructure to build this on, but the adoption curve hadn't ticked up yet. But then you enter the pandemic and people are at home, buying NFTs and downloading MetaMask or Rainbow. And then all of a sudden everything kind of clicked into place. It's like, now's the time to build this on Web3 in crypto, make it accessible to the masses in a way that you're not buying $100,000 profile picture. And that's kind of how we've built the team and product this far.
That's cool. So, I mean, super savvy, and honestly, it sounds very complicated. So you have a tech background, yeah? Like, take me into that story a little bit.
I do, yeah. It's probably non-traditional compared to many who have a tech background. I'm self-taught as a software engineer. We can certainly dive into that. I started in the basic world, if people remember those languages these days. Maybe dating myself, but fast forward to this explosion of the thing called the web, and learned HTML, CSS very early on, and then JavaScript subsequently. Fast forward a little bit, that actually took me into a role at LinkedIn, where I led the product engineering team for a product at LinkedIn called Recruiter. It does exactly what you think it does, right? So it's the enterprise facing, kind of product from LinkedIn. This was 2013-ish. So before Microsoft bought them, led a team there called Talent Solutions. Left LinkedIn for a company called Adapar, which is in the private wealth management space. Built a pretty cool product there, targeting wealth managers and advisors at large banks, right? And was the VP of product development there, like I said, and kind of managed product management, engineering, design, QA. And then left there for the startup world, and have worn multiple hats, as many people in the startup world do. But one of those is often, either CTO or, kind of senior backend engineer, or jack of all trades as it requires.
Yeah, that's incredible. So you've been in a lot of different, I mean, LinkedIn's a large company, and then you've kind of been all over, and had a lot of changes. Do you mind to look back real quick? Has there been any through lines of when you change jobs or whenever you've changed jobs, what's been the motivator to the next thing? Can you think of anything that you're like, yeah, this is why I've probably made all these changes? Is there anything you can think of?
Yeah, I mean, by and large, if I'm being honest with myself, there was some upward mobility in some sense, right? So, and certainly not always compensation. I mean, leaving big tech like LinkedIn and Adapar for the startup world is not a move you make for compensation for liquid compensation anyway.
Yeah.
But I think looking at my own values, I value freedom, I value ownership. That's why we're building bunches, right? To give that to creators. But in my own job story, like I've wanted to give that to myself. And so, having the freedom and owning my own destiny, is really what brought me to the startup world. And then also just learning new things, right? Like I don't have a financial background. And so, the move to Adapar was largely motivated by just curiosity, and trying to learn this massive system that impacted all of our lives so much in 2008, 2009. And, that was a huge part of the move too, is just this insatiable thirst for knowledge.
Okay, that's cool. I'm thrilled you touched on that because that was on my mind earlier today, thinking about talking to you. But this constant learning path that it sounds like you've been on, and even took a job just based off curiosity. Well, now you've got a startup in a world where like there is so much curiosity. So do
Yeah.
you think that way? We don't talk about it a whole lot, but like from a hiring standpoint, like do you like to kind of find people that maybe they don't match up for every single technical thing, but they're curious? Because I know you can teach anybody how to do what you need them to do, right? So, like, do you look for that in folks, and have you looked for that in folks in the past?
Absolutely. So, we have a couple of values at Bunches. One of them, well, we refer to them as identities, not values. And so, values are kind of pieces of who you are, whereas an identity is kind of a core piece of who you are. So, one of our identities at Bunches is being a learner. And so, we actually hire for that and look for that in someone's trajectory, where they've been, their experience, certainly on their resume, and a lot of that, honestly, is just personal bias, right? So, I myself, coming from a non-traditional background, having studied political science and philosophy in undergrad, but ending up in the tech world, like I love seeing that in other folks where they're coming from a non-traditional background. Be it, I've hired people from nuclear engineering to philosophy to finance who ended up in tech. Just really runs the gamut. But that desire for learning is such a core part, especially in an industry like crypto, where things are moving so fast. Like if you can't digest information at the same speed that the market is moving, like you're not going to be successful in this industry.
Yeah, that's it seems like in your industry more than really anybody else that I can think of, it's like you do have to be learning because y'all's industry seems to be that's a prerequisite. You've got to be hip to and comfortable with learning new skills always because it's
That's
changing.
right. There's a couple of ways that we actually identify that, right? So, like, in an interview, I'll ask, like, what are some things that you've been reading lately? And the cop out answers are typical tech books, right? Like, whether it's like code articles or the latest from Ben Horowitz or like whatever it may be. But if someone is responding like, hey, I just read this like really interesting diatribe on how World War I led into World War II, or I'm reading Hemingway short stories, or I just read like poetry from last year's prize winner or whatever. Like that starts to give green lights in my head for the candidate, right? The other thing that I like to do, even more than resume, like by and large, I ignore kind of past experience. I want to see who a person is right here and now. And so I'll go to GitHub, especially for technical positions, obviously, and look like what are they working through? What are they hacking on? What are they how many green squares do they have on their profile, right?
That's
Like
good.
how often are they trying to experiment and ship and deliver things? Because especially for engineers, building is a form of learning. And so I think that's a really kind of important characteristic for tech workers.
That's really great. we had talked to someone in a healthcare company. I think it was maybe a guy named Robbie Allen, but he had talked about he'd had some employees that they were encouraging. They were going to get like master degrees or whatever in something that was way unrelated from their field. Like I was like, that's
Yeah.
pretty cool to encourage, and I knew you would be similar, because that's what you've done. I feel like you've learned and reinvented yourself, and learned and reinvented, and now here you are as a startup leading in that same way.
Yeah, that's right. And, thank you. I take that as a huge compliment.
Absolutely.
But um, it's one of these things where like the tech industry is moving so fast, and it's one of, we all like to say that, right? We all like to say tech moves so fast, software is eating the world, the world is changing at a higher clip than ever. But then we also pride, a lot of times we pride people for being stalwart or stubborn or stagnant in, we call them experts, like they've been in the same industry for an extended period of time, and there's certainly value to that, right? But at the same time, if you're trying to build something new and innovative in a fast-moving industry, you have to reflect that yourself, and your team has to reflect that, as a hiring manager, as a builder, as a job candidate, right? Like you have to reflect the industry in which you're working in. Certainly bring something new to it, but also kind of reflect it in the sense that you yourself are adaptive and learning and moving fast, and maybe that does mean reinventing yourself every 18 to 24 months.
Yeah, that's so great. So I want to go back a little bit further too. Have you, all this knowledge that you have from a leadership standpoint as you're running this company, did you have somebody that you've kind of used as a mentor over the years, or are you more taking from, well, I learned this at LinkedIn and I learned this at the next place and this at the next place, or is it maybe a little bit of both?
Yeah, I've certainly had mentors kind of along the way. I mean, I think of my direct manager at LinkedIn, Sarah Clatterbuck. I mean, we've stayed in touch even since LinkedIn. That was years ago. Um, uh, After LinkedIn, like Eric Poirier, the CEO at Adapar, learned a ton from him. I've also learned from both my peers and direct reports. I mean, my co-founder at Bunch this is our second company together. He's, I forget, some junior, just a phenomenal learner, phenomenal, co-founder, but he's also one of these people that sharpen who I am as a person. And we've put in the work to have the relationship where we can give each other direct feedback. And so while I don't necessarily look at him as a mentor, but rather as a mentee, he's also made me an extraordinarily better leader over the last 5 years, just like people at Adapar and LinkedIn prior.
I think you relate to this some. I've been thinking about this a lot more just as I'm getting older and with us running a business too. But like a big motivator for me, I think, is sustaining our own business so I can have more time maybe with my family and kind of have more freedom in my schedule. When candidates are looking for jobs, the hot phrase right now is work-life balance. I guess it's the same thing for business owners too, but I'm thinking towards the future of like, that's such a motivator for me. And I was just talking about with somebody else, like, I guess when I was younger, it was money. Like, it was just money. Like, I want to make more money. But now I'm like, yeah, no doubt, I'd love to retire well, but like if I can get to a place that feels comfortable where I can just spend more time with my kids and eventually their kids and whatever, that's a big motivator. Do you find yourself kind of thinking that way as a motivator for running your own business now?
I'd love to tell you yes, but that wouldn't be true.
Yeah.
So for transparency's sake, wife, 3 kids, 3 beautiful daughters. They just turned 12, 12, and 10. They all have the same birthday.
Whoa.
This past week. Yeah, that's a fun fact. And if someone is looking to start a business or looking to start, certainly a tech company in the crypto space,
Yeah.
to work on a work-life balance, then that's a massive mistake. I think you probably have less time in that scenario than just working a 9 to 5 or 10 to 6 or 10 to 4 if you're in the valley, like type environment. That said, I'm not a firm believer in work-life balance. I'm more on rhythms. Like there are seasons in life where work is demanding, right? You're in a fundraise, you're in a product push, your P&L is low, right? Like you're running out of runway, or you're in a massive hiring spurt, right? And you're sourcing and recruiting and et cetera. Like those are seasons where work is more demanding of you. At the same time, life can be more demanding as well, right? And you have to tell work like, hey, I'm in a season of high demand on my family life or my personal life, whether that's a mental health break, or you're moving, or milestones within your family or your children. Like I think there are kind of peaks and valleys, rather than every day being, okay, I'm going to go dedicate 7 to 8 hours to work, and then I'm going to dedicate 6 to 7 hours to family, or whatever the balance is. Then I'm going to sleep for another 8. Like I don't think that's sustainable nor realistic. And so the balance to me isn't really a balance day to day or even week to week. It's really these kind of peaks and troughs of the demands of both work and life. And I think of them as seasons, not necessarily kind of a balance. And finding that rhythm is something that, frankly, it comes with age, it comes with experience, it comes from making a lot of mistakes.
Yeah.
And so, that's kind of how I approach it.
Yeah, that's so good. That's a good thought. So yeah, I think you're right. Maybe if I back up and I think about kind of my previous statement, maybe the things I would do with the money I make at my job is different. Like maybe I wanted a car and things like that. Now I'm thinking like maybe more vacations, and that speaks more to what you're talking about. Because you're right. Since doing this, there probably have been days where I've spent more hours trying to run the business than I would have ever done as a 9-to-5 employee.
Yeah, well, I mean, the other thing to really think through, and we've talked a little bit about this kind of off the podcast, but there are more valuable forms of capital than financial. One of the most finite resources in the world is time. Unlike money, time is unidirectional and you can't make more of it. And we only get a finite amount of it ever. Right? It's like someone saying, when you're born, you get $1 million for the next 20 years, and that's it. Right? Like, time is one of these most finite resources, and so we should protect and value time more than we protect and value financial capital. In the same way, another form of capital that I think is more rare than financial capital is social capital. The relationships we have, the attention that we can garner, and not just using people in a transactional sense, but in a pure relational sense, fostering deep-rooted relationships is so much more important than chasing a paycheck or chasing, a retirement age or whatever, because those things are much more finite than, a salary or benefits for most people in the West.
Yeah, that's so good, man. That's so good. I appreciate you sharing that. I'm thinking now, I wish we were going to get it out in time. I was about to say, I can't wait to see you next week at the event, promote that, but this won't be out by then. But anyway, we're excited that you speaking of relationships, like you seem to do quite a bit of that in Nashville, like a lot of relationship building, speaking, doing events like the one you're doing with us. You had one 2 nights ago. Like, has that been a big piece for you since moving to Nashville, is really diving into the community here?
It is, and I think it's kind of an outworking of the excitement that's occurring here in Nashville, right? Like there are not only big tech companies moving here, like Amazon or Oracle. There are not only startups that are here, like Bunches, for instance. Not only like a very large healthcare scene, fintech scene, but also massive Web3 community here as well. That's kind of under the radar right now. And we don't. This is both a pro and a con. Nashville doesn't have the kind of hype-driven culture of other markets like in LA or Miami, right? It's a much more hustle-driven culture, which means that we've flown under the radar for a while.
Yeah.
But it also means that a lot of the community is just tight and interconnected, and we're looking to learn from one another. It is one of these outworkings of a desire for more social capital and to accumulate social capital and to build relationships and to contribute back to the community, right? Like, I enjoy doing events like the one that we're doing here in a couple of weeks. I enjoy doing events like the one I did a couple of days ago. I enjoy doing things like working with the legislature here to, pass the Dow law, like,
Yeah.
because of the relationships that come along the way. I don't get paid to do those things, right? Like, nor do I want to be frank. Like, it's one of these things where giving to the community often pays back in spades, and you never know how that actually works itself out. And it's a lot of fun, right? Like, the Nashville tech community is just a couple of, items away, whether it's press or massive exit, away from being a national treasure and being recognized nationally. And so being here on the ground floor, getting to meet with folks like you, or, people in the community, like, it's special.
Yeah, it's cool to hear you say that. I agree completely. It's just felt, well, I tell the story sometimes, but before we were moving here, we were in LA and had met someone weeks before we were leaving and said, hey, they happen to be from Nashville. It was a music thing. And the guy was like, man, y'all get ready to come on to Nashville. The water's warm. And that was like his quote. And it's just kind of held true. I was like, man, you were such a hick. Like, cause I'm from Arkansas. So it resonated well with me. I was like, it's held true. The water has been warm. It's a great group of professionals that relationships benefit not only professionally, but personally too here. So it's cool to hear.
100%. And, some of the first friends, I moved here in July 2020. Some of the first friends that I've made here are in the professional environment, right? There may be other startup founders, et cetera. But it does extend past, kind of exchanging leadership ideas or tech or, learnings from the industry or whatever. It's much more deeper than that, which is, again, it's part of the stage that we're at, right? Like, this tech ecosystem is almost a startup unto itself, where, Nashville right now is in the seed round. And it's going to be one of these really fun things to see, over the next 18 months, 3 years, 5 years, much less, 10 to 20 years. Like, it's going to be pretty wild to look back and see kind of where we are now. Not, much less even before, I got here, that a lot of people have done phenomenal work laying foundation. I think of the Tech Council and, Brian Moyer and some of the work that's been laid here, but before us. And, fast forward another 5 to 10 years, it's going to be pretty phenomenal to look back and remember this time.
Haven't heard anybody use that analogy, but it's basically like this. It's like in a startup of itself, and it's currently in the seed round. That's really good. I like that a lot.
Yeah. It's, just like you're evaluating a startup, it's about team, right? The people, the products, right? The city that is here is phenomenal. It's a perfect blend of kind of the things that make Southern culture distinct from the rest of the states. But also it's a diverse metropolitan city. It's also, Shane Mack calls it kind of the switchboard city, because we're, hour and a half, 2 hours flight from kind of most major cities on the East Coast. And, but also there's things like cryptocurrency laws on the books now, and 0% income tax, extraordinarily, business friendly state. And all of these kind of characteristics come together to make, a pretty stellar startup that if I were investing in cities, and, by extension I have, Nashville would certainly be receiving a seed round check from me. That's for sure.
Yeah, that's good, man. That's so good. Well, if you don't mind, I really appreciate your time today. This has been so cool. How can candidates, when you're hiring, I believe you are now, so this is probably perfect. So if they want to reach out to you, or maybe other businesses that maybe want to collaborate with you or anything like that, how can folks get a hold of you? And we'll make sure and link those things.
Yeah, we are hiring, just to be transparent. So we're looking for a senior software engineer, ideally in Nashville, open to remote, ideally with Elixir experience, not required, but that is kind of our back end. So senior software engineer on the back end. We're also looking for 3 interns, both on the engineering side, helping with quality control as well as our web client, but also on the business side, whether that's social media or partnerships. And so you can find more information about that via LinkedIn. I'm fairly active on LinkedIn, as you can imagine. Just look me up, Derek Brown. The URL is linkedin.com/in/Derek Brown JR. I'm a junior. For contact, you can DM me there. You can also DM me on Twitter. I'm at Derek Brown on Twitter. And you can find me on Bunches, of course. And that's bunches.app.
Cool. We'll make sure and link all that stuff too, but that's great. This was awesome. Awesome stuff. Thank you again for your time. I appreciate it. It's been so cool to get to know you and onward from here.
Yeah, 100%. Thank you, Mason, for both the opportunity and the time this morning.
Absolutely. Have a great day. We'll see you soon.
All right, man.
Yeah, man. Take care.